lesson 2, so we need to talk about years. Years are kind of tricky because every culture has its own years. The Chinese calendar is different than the Hebrew calendar, which is different than the Muslim calendar, which is different than the Christian calendar, which is different than the Eastern Orthodox Christian calendar, which is different than native calendars here on this continent, and on and on and on. Different than the Mayan calendar, the Incan calendar, etc. Calendars are arbitrary. When you start a year, typically is relating to the culture that you're a part of, okay? And since this country was founded by people who were from Europe at a time where Christianity was kind of the thing ruling how people conceived of their time, then we've kind of just borrowed from that. Now, I want to point out that in this class, we don't use AD and BC. AD means Anno Domini. It does not mean after death. If it meant after death, that means you'd have a 33-year gap that made no sense whatsoever. Anno Domini is Latin, shockingly, for in the year of our Lord. The problem with this is there's only about 1 billion people on the planet who believe in that particular iteration of that God. So we can't use that. And BCE, or BC is problematic too because that's before Christ. The problem with that is, well, there's a number of problems, not least of which being that the Gospels are written, many generations after he was supposed to have lived, but also that even if we do go on the idea that those count as primary documents, they don't, of the chronicle of his life, they're not, then the math doesn't add up. It turns out that if you look at the Romans' dating system, it was way superior to the dating system of the Jews at the time, largely because the Romans kept burning down the temples. The Romans are not the good guys. So that means that if you look back into the Gospels and you try to figure out when Christ was supposed to have been born, the math comes out to him being born about 4 years BC, which is a miracle. He was born 4 years before Christ. But it's an agreed upon set of dates. So what we've done is we've decided to start calling it, and by decided to, like long since before I was born, scholars started doing this, Common Era and before the Common Era. Because if you just go back and you're like, okay, well, we're going to restructure the math, it's a problem. It's a huge problem. So it's Common Era, CE, and before the Common Era, BCE. And that it just allows for a lot more like, hey, we get it, this is what these people did, and we're all not going to change the math, okay? So that 3 minutes has gone by. Let's talk about years, okay? The years are mainly in the context of who the consul is at the time. There's always 2 consuls of Rome, with the exception of a couple different years. These are the executives, and that's how the Romans would keep track of the years. That's how I know about the BCE problem. Caesar, Caesare et Bibulo consulibus, in the consulships of Caesar and Bibulus, okay? And the Romans would know exactly when that was, and that's kind of how they discussed it. It's kind of like how if I said something happened during the Eisenhower administration, you'd be like, okay, I know what 8-year period that would be. The Romans would also use actual years to describe this, but very colloquially, they would just use during the consulships. So this is ablative of time when. Caesare et Bibulo consulibus. So whoever the 2 consuls were, you put their names in the ablative, and then you say consulibus during their consulships. All right, now let's talk more about years. They also occur in the context of the founding of Rome. That's year 1, okay? Now, their year 1 is what we consider 753 BCE. So Rome was founded 753 years before our Common Era started, okay? And that's called ab urbe condita, from the founding of the city. In fact, that's its own special ablative. It's called the ab urbe condita ablative. It's kind of ridiculous, but it kind of makes sense since it's the founding of their people. They didn't think that nothing happened prior to that. They just said, oh, but then we started measuring things. Okay? And that's going to be like April 21st, ab urbe condita. That would be the first date. So that takes care of that. Now, if we want to convert ab urbe condita to our years, and we typically will want to, okay? So if you were reading Roman writings, and they said, oh yeah, 15 AUC, 15 years ab urbe condita. You got to do some math to figure out when that is because we're going across 2 different cultures. So here's the formula. If the AUC is less than or equal to 753, subtract it from 754 because there's no year 0. So for instance, if I said 621 AUC, so that's 621 years since the founding of the city. Do the math, and I get to 133. And I get to the year 133 BCE, the year that one of the Gracchi brothers gets killed. Gets his head smashed in with a table leg. I like old traditions. We should bring those back. So, if the AUC is greater than 753, subtract 753 from it. Okay? So, if it's 795 AUC, 795 years from the founding of Rome, you end up with 42 CE, 42 Common Era. So when Mark Antony goes to war in Gaul, I think. Okay, so 42 CE. Okay, so if it's greater than, you want to have notes on this. Now that's converting from Roman years to our years. What if we wanted to convert from our years to Roman years? Just for funsies. We could do that. If the date is BCE, subtract it from 754, because there's no year 0. So if you looked at the year 212 BCE, which is, I think, right around the time that Hannibal gets his butt handed to him, you do the math, and you find out that that's year 542 ab urbe condita. But if the date is CE, you add it to 753. So if we look at the date that the greatest movie ever made came out, 1977, you do the math, and you find out that that's 2,730 AUC. We could also just call that 1 SSW, the first year since Star Wars. So there you go. Copy it down. When you're done, I want you to do exercise 36C, but don't do numbers 1 and 2 because I don't know what date you're doing it on, and don't do the do your own birthday. That's fine for fun, but I can't check you on that. I don't know. But then do 3 through 8, and that's actually all I need you to do for that. Okay. All right. I'm gonna hit the button.